The city of Florence, in the year 1397, is already the banking capital of Europe, though the banking industry it hosts looks almost nothing like what that phrase will mean a century later. Florentine merchant families have been lending money across Europe since the 13th century, financing kings and popes and the wool trade that makes Tuscany wealthy, operating through networks of agents and correspondents that span from London to Constantinople. Several of these families, the Bardi, the Peruzzi, the Acciaiuoli, had grown to enormous size and then collapsed catastrophically when Edward III of England defaulted on war loans in the 1340s, taking down firms that had lent the English crown more money than the entire Florentine treasury contained. The lesson the surviving Florentine bankers take from those failures is specific and structural. No single client, no matter how powerful, should be able to bring down the entire operation. Concentrated exposure to sovereign debt is not a business model. It is a slow countdown. Giovanni de Bicci de' Medici opens the Medici Bank in Florence in 1397 with this lesson already absorbed into the architecture of what he builds. The bank he founds is not merely a new firm doing what the old firms did. It is a different kind of institution, organized on principles that do not yet have names, but that will eventually become the foundational practices of modern banking. Giovanni does not build a single bank. He builds a system. The core innovation is the branch structure. Rather than operating as a single firm with agents in other cities, the Medici Bank creates a network of legally semi-independent branches. In Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, London, and eventually Lyon and Milan, each one organized as a separate partnership with its own capital, its own management, and its own liability. The Florence headquarters holds a controlling interest in each branch, but does not directly guarantee the debts of any of them. If the London branch makes catastrophically bad loans, it can fail without dragging the Rome branch or the Venice branch down with it. The disaster that destroyed the Bardi and the Peruzzi, a single catastrophic exposure that cascades through the entire firm, is structurally prevented by the separation of legal liability between branches. The branch managers are not employees in the modern sense. They are junior partners, holding a stake in the branch they manage, their own personal wealth tied directly to its performance. Giovanni gives his branch managers genuine commercial autonomy, the authority to make loans, set rates, hire staff, and develop client relationships within their territories, while retaining overall strategic control from Florence. The incentive structure this creates is more powerful than any supervision system. The branch manager who grows his branch's business grows his own wealth. The branch manager who makes reckless loans risks his own capital as much as the Medici families. It is not a perfect alignment of interests, but it is a far better one than the agency relationships the older firms relied on, where distant representatives operated on salary with limited personal exposure to the consequences of their decisions. The instrument that makes the branch network commercially coherent is the lettera di cambio, the bill of exchange. Long-distance trade in the 15th century faces a practical problem of almost comic severity. Merchants doing business across multiple countries need to transfer money between cities that use different currencies. Along roads where carrying large amounts of coin is an invitation to robbery. Across distances that make a round trip for physical currency a matter of months. The bill of exchange solves this problem through a mechanism of almost elegant simplicity. A merchant in Florence who needs to pay a supplier in Bruges does not send coin. He gives his money to the Medici branch in Florence, which issues him a letter, the bill of exchange, ordering the Medici branch in Bruges to pay the equivalent amount in Flemish currency to whoever presents the letter. No coin moves across the Alps. A piece of paper moves instead, and on both ends of the transaction, the Medici branch collects a small fee for the conversion and the service. The bills of exchange do something else that is less obvious, but more important. Church law in the 15th century prohibits usury, the charging of interest on loans, as a sin against God. Florentine bankers, like bankers across Europe, have spent generations developing workarounds for this prohibition, and the bill of exchange is the most elegant of them. When the Medici branch in Florence issues a bill payable in Bruges, it sets the exchange rate for the conversion between florins and Flemish groats. When the Bruges branch issues a return bill back to Florence, it sets the exchange rate in the other direction. The difference between these rates, calibrated so that the combined transaction always returns a modest profit to the bank, is not called interest. It is called exchange. It is, in practice, interest. But the theological framing is different enough that confessors can absolve it and popes can ignore it. And the Medici Bank can operate as the financial infrastructure of a continent while officially charging no interest on anything. The relationship with the papacy is the Medici Bank's single most important client relationship, and Giovanni de Bicci cultivates it with the patience and precision of a man who understands that institutional clients at this scale are not acquired, but grown. The Catholic Church in the early 15th century is an institution of staggering financial complexity. It collects revenue, tithes, fees, indulgence payments, annates from newly appointed clergy, from every diocese in Christendom, scattered across dozens of countries using dozens of currencies. It disburses funds, salaries for the Roman Curia, payments to contractors rebuilding churches, subsidies to favored rulers, across the same geography. Managing this flow of money requires exactly the kind of international branch network that the Medici Bank has built, and no other institution in Europe has built it to the same scale or with the same reliability. Giovanni wins the papal account through a combination of competitive pricing, demonstrated competence, and careful political positioning during the Council of Constance in 1414, where the Church is attempting to resolve the Great Schism that has produced 3 competing popes simultaneously. Giovanni lends money to the right people, extends credit at the right moments, and emerges from the council as the primary banker of the newly unified papacy. The papal account brings with it not just the direct business of managing church finances, but the extraordinary indirect benefit of being associated with the most prestigious institutional client in the Christian world. Every bishop, every cardinal, every royal court that maintains a relationship with Rome also maintains a relationship with the bank that manages Rome's money. The Medici Bank does not just serve the papacy. It uses the papacy as the anchor of an entire commercial network. Cosimo de' Medici inherits the bank from his father Giovanni in 1429 and spends the next 3 decades transforming what is already the most powerful financial institution in Europe into the political and cultural engine of Florentine civilization. Cosimo is a banker of the first order, careful, systematic, attentive to risk in ways that his son and grandson will not be. But he is also a man who understands something his father perhaps did not fully grasp, that financial power and political power are not separate categories. They are the same category, viewed from different angles. Florence in Cosimo's time is formally a republic, governed by councils and committees drawn from the major guilds, with elaborate mechanisms designed to prevent any single family from accumulating sufficient power to dominate the city permanently. Cosimo dismantles these mechanisms, not by overthrowing them, but by making them irrelevant. A city councilman who owes money to the Medici Bank, whose business depends on Medici credit, whose political career has been advanced by Medici patronage, is not an independent voice in a republican deliberation. He is, in the practical sense that matters, a Medici instrument. Cosimo never holds the most prestigious formal offices of the Florentine Republic. He does not need to. The men who hold those offices hold them, in most cases, because he allows them to. The patronage network that Cosimo builds is financial at its core and cultural at its surface. He commissions Brunelleschi, Donatello, Fra Angelico, and a dozen other artists and architects whose work will define the visual vocabulary of the Italian Renaissance. He builds libraries, funds humanist scholars, collects manuscripts. The cultural program is genuine. Cosimo is sincerely interested in classical learning and artistic excellence. But it is also strategic. Patronage creates obligation. The artist who builds your chapel, the scholar who dedicates his translation to you, the architect who designs your palace, each of them owes you a form of public endorsement that money alone cannot buy. Cosimo turns Florence into the most culturally brilliant city in Europe, and in doing so makes the Medici family synonymous with the city itself, so that any attack on Medici power can be framed as an attack on Florence's greatness. Lorenzo de' Medici, Cosimo's grandson, inherits this system in 1469 at the age of 20, and immediately begins to change it in ways that are visually magnificent and structurally disastrous. Lorenzo is a genuinely extraordinary figure, poet, philosopher, diplomat, political tactician of the first rank, a man whose personal intelligence and cultural sophistication make him the most celebrated ruler in Europe. He is also a deeply negligent banker, and the distinction between the family's political apparatus and its commercial institution blurs fatally under his management, in ways that will not become fully visible until after his death. Lorenzo treats the Medici Bank less as a business to be managed prudently than as a resource to be deployed for political ends. Loans that Giovanni and Cosimo would have declined as too risky are extended to rulers whose political goodwill Lorenzo needs. The Duke of Burgundy, the King of England, various Italian signori whose territories border Florentine interests, branch managers who make commercially sensible decisions that conflict with Lorenzo's political agenda are overruled from Florence. The separation between the bank's commercial judgment and the family's political interests, carefully maintained by Giovanni and largely respected by Cosimo, dissolves under Lorenzo into a system where the bank's resources are available for whatever the family's political situation requires. The enemies this creates are real and accumulate systematically. The most dangerous of them are the Pazzi, the second most powerful banking family in Florence, and behind the Pazzi, Pope Sixtus IV. The conflict between the Medici and the Pazzi is not primarily personal. It is structural. The Pazzi Bank competes directly with the Medici Bank for the most lucrative accounts available to a Florentine financial institution, and the most lucrative of all, the papal account, has been a Medici monopoly for 2 generations. Sixtus IV, elected Pope in 1471, is an ambitious builder and a political operator who finds the Medici monopoly on his financial infrastructure uncomfortable. He begins shifting portions of papal business to the Pazzi Bank, most significantly giving the Pazzi the contract to manage the revenues of the newly acquired papal territory of Imola, a small but strategically located city-state in the Romagna that Sixtus wants to use as a base for his nephew, Girolamo Riario's political ambitions. Lorenzo had wanted Imola himself as a buffer against papal territorial expansion in the Romagna, and had used the Medici Bank's control of the papal account to try to block Sixtus from raising the funds to buy it. Sixtus had simply bypassed the Medici Bank, gone to the Pazzi, secured the financing, and bought Imola anyway. The incident reveals something that neither party can now ignore. The Medici Bank's influence over the papacy is not absolute, and if Sixtus continues redirecting papal business to the Pazzi, the Medici commercial position will erode in ways that directly threaten their political dominance in Florence. The conspiracy that follows is born from this intersection of banking rivalry and political ambition. Francesco Salviati, the Archbishop of Pisa, whom Lorenzo has personally blocked from taking up his position by refusing to recognize his appointment, joins with Francesco de' Pazzi, the most aggressive member of the Pazzi banking family, and with Girolamo Riario, the Pope's nephew, to plan what they frame as a liberation of Florence from Medici tyranny. What they are actually planning is a transfer of financial and political dominance from one banking family to another, with papal backing. The plan requires killing both Lorenzo de' Medici and his younger brother Giuliano simultaneously, to prevent either from surviving to organize a counter-response. The conspirators choose the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, the Duomo, as their location, and High Mass on the 26th of April, 1478, as their moment. The selection of a church is pragmatic. It is the one place where both brothers will be present, unarmed, in a confined space with predictable positions, surrounded by enough chaos and noise to provide cover for the initial moments of violence. Giuliano de' Medici receives 19 stab wounds and dies on the cathedral floor. Lorenzo is wounded in the neck but manages to retreat into the sacristy, whose heavy bronze doors are pulled shut against his attackers. He survives. The simultaneity that the conspiracy requires for success fails at the critical moment, and without it, the entire plan collapses. A political assassination that achieves half its objective achieves nothing, because the surviving target is now galvanized, armed with martyrdom, and in possession of complete information about who is responsible. Lorenzo's response is swift and comprehensive and politically brilliant. The Archbishop Salviati and Francesco de Pazzi are hanged from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria within hours of the attack. Other conspirators are hunted down across Florence and executed. The Pazzi family is stripped of its assets, its members exiled or imprisoned, its very name legally abolished. Florentine magistrates order that the Pazzi coat of arms be destroyed wherever it appears in the city, that streets bearing the Pazzi name be renamed, that any Florentine who is married into the Pazzi family be permitted to dissolve the marriage. An entire banking dynasty is erased from the commercial and social life of Florence by executive decree, its accounts seized and its client relationships absorbed by the Medici network. Sixtus IV, furious at the conspiracy's failure and at Lorenzo's survival, excommunicates Lorenzo and places Florence under interdict, a theological sanction prohibiting the celebration of Mass anywhere in the city, a punishment designed to turn the Florentine population against its ruler by making them spiritually hostage to the Pope's political dispute with their prince. Lorenzo responds by convening a council of Florentine clergy who declare the interdict unjust and continue celebrating Mass regardless. The theological authority of the papacy, when deployed against a ruler who controls the city's clergy through the same network of patronage and obligation that controls its bankers and merchants, turns out to be significantly less coercive than the Pope expects. The war that follows, papal and Neapolitan forces against Florence and its allies, runs for 2 years and resolves not through military decision, but through Lorenzo's single, most dramatic personal intervention. In 1479, with Florentine territory under pressure and no military resolution in sight, Lorenzo sails to Naples and negotiates directly with King Ferrante of Naples, separating him from the Papal alliance and ending the war on terms that preserve Florentine independence. The diplomatic performance is genuinely extraordinary, conducted by a man traveling into the court of a monarch who has every incentive to keep him as a hostage, relying on nothing but his personal credibility, and the calculation that Ferrante gains more from a stable Florence than from a destroyed one. The political crisis passes. The banking crisis does not. The decade and a half following the Pazzi conspiracy is a period of accelerating commercial deterioration for the Medici Bank that Lorenzo's diplomatic brilliance cannot address because its causes are embedded in the structural decisions he has made about how to run the institution. The London branch, extended deeply into loans to Edward IV of England that the English crown has no particular urgency to repay, deteriorates through the 1470s and is effectively wound down by 1478. The Bruges branch, entangled in loans to Charles the Bold of Burgundy that become unrecoverable after Charles's death at the Battle of Nancy in 1477, follows it into insolvency. The Lyon branch struggles as French royal policy shifts against Florentine merchants. The Rome branch, still managing what remains of the papal account, becomes the bank's primary revenue source at precisely the moment when that account is itself being reduced by Sixtus IV's continuing preference for diversifying his financial relationships away from Medici dependency. Lorenzo responds to each crisis by doing what he has always done, using the bank's resources to address political problems, extending credit to maintain alliances, keeping branch managers in place past the point where commercial prudence would have replaced them, because the managers are personally loyal and political loyalty has become more important to Lorenzo than commercial competence. The feedback loop that the original branch structure was designed to prevent, concentrated political exposure distorting commercial decisions, has been running for 15 years by the time Lorenzo dies in 1492. His son, Piero de' Medici, known to history as Piero the Unfortunate, inherits in 1492 a political system that still functions and a banking system that is quietly hollowed out. When Charles VIII of France invades Italy in 1494 and demands passage through Florentine territory, Piero makes catastrophic concessions, handing over Florentine fortresses and territory without extracting anything of commercial or military value in return, that the population of Florence interprets as surrender. The Medici are expelled from Florence in November 1494. Their palace is sacked. Their art collection is dispersed. The bank, already insolvent in all but name, simply ceases to exist as a functioning institution. What the Medici Bank leaves behind is not merely a ruined dynasty. It leaves the entire institutional vocabulary of modern European banking, branch banking, the bill of exchange as the primary instrument of international commercial credit, the separation of liability between banking units, the integration of financial power and political influence as complementary rather than competing strategies. Every major banking system that develops in Europe over the following 2 centuries, in Antwerp, in Amsterdam, in London, builds on foundations that Giovanni de Bicci laid in Florence in 1397. Most of them without acknowledging the source, some of them without knowing it. The Pazzi conspiracy is remembered as a drama of daggers in a cathedral, of brothers separated by a moment of violence, of a young prince escaping through bronze doors. What it actually is, stripped of its theatrical surface, is a corporate takeover attempt, a rival financial institution, backed by the most powerful religious sovereign in the Christian world, making a violent bid for market position in the most lucrative banking territory in Europe. It fails because Lorenzo survives. It reveals, in its failure, how completely the boundary between commercial competition and political violence has dissolved in the world the Medici Bank created. A world where the control of credit is the control of power, where banking and governance are not different activities, but different names for the same activity, and where the men who decide who gets money decide, by extension, who gets everything else.